The first thing Adrian noticed was that my shoes were gone. Not the expensive ones he had bought me for charity dinners or rooftop parties, but the worn gray sneakers I kept beside the penthouse door because they were comfortable and mine. The second thing he noticed was the silence. I knew because, later, he told me he had stood in the entryway for almost a full minute calling my name as if I might answer from the bedroom, the kitchen, the balcony, anywhere. I didn't. I was already gone. On the marble table beneath the windows, I had left his gifts. The watch from our first anniversary. The bracelet he sent after missing my birthday dinner. The leather weekender that arrived the morning after he canceled our trip. The diamond cuff links I had never asked for. The keys to the car I rarely drove. Even the black card with my name embossed beneath his. Everything was lined up neatly, almost politely. That was important to me. I didn't want Adrien to think I had smashed things or thrown them across the room in some desperate attempt to make him feel guilty. I wasn't angry enough for that anymore. Anger would have meant I still expected something from him. I had left one envelope on top of the pile. Inside was the penthouse key. No accusation. No dramatic goodbye. Just 6 words. I don't need these anymore. By the time Adrien found it, I was sitting in the back of a cab with one suitcase between my knees and my phone turned face down on the seat beside me. I had packed less than I thought I would. Clothes I had owned before him. A framed photo of my mother. 2 books with my notes in the margins. The chipped ceramic mug Adrien once teased me for refusing to replace. I had spent years inside a home where almost everything could be replaced by tomorrow morning. That mug couldn't. Maybe that was why I wanted it. My phone lit up before we reached the next block. Adrien. I watched his name glow against the dark screen until it stopped. Then it rang again. And again. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted him scared. Not because I wanted him to chase me. I had spent too long wanting exactly that. Wanting him to notice the distance before I was forced. To make it visible. The cab turned downtown, and the glass towers disappeared behind us one by one. My chest hurt, but beneath the hurt was something I hadn't felt in months. Space. At the penthouse, Adrien called a 4th time. Then came a message. Where are you? A few seconds later, Noah, answer me. That was the strange part. He sounded urgent now. For months, I had learned not to be urgent. If I wanted dinner together, I asked whether he might be free. If I wanted him home before midnight, I told him not to worry if he couldn't make it. If I missed him, I swallowed the words before they became one more demand on a man who always seemed to have a bigger emergency than our marriage. Adrien never asked me to become easy. I had done that myself. Quietly. Efficiently. I became the kind of husband who never interrupted meetings, never complained about canceled plans, never asked why flowers kept arriving instead of the person who ordered them. I told myself it was love to understand him. I told myself successful men were busy. I told myself I was lucky. Everyone else certainly thought I was. Adrian Cole's husband. The man living 40 floors above the city with a private elevator, a closet bigger than the apartment I had grown up in, and enough gifts to make every disappointment look ungrateful. My phone buzzed again. Did something happen? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because for the first time, Adrien was asking the right question after it no longer mattered. I typed 3 different answers and erased all of them. Nothing happened. Everything happened. You happened. None of them were true enough. The truth wasn't one betrayal or one cruel sentence. Adrien had never humiliated me in public. He had never screamed at me. He had never told me I didn't matter. If he had, leaving might have been easier. Instead, he had given me everything. He remembered the brand of tea I liked and forgot the nights I drank it alone. He knew my jacket size and stopped noticing when I wore one at the dinner table because the food had gone cold. He could have his assistant find a sold-out watch on another continent, but somehow 3 weeks would pass before he asked how I was sleeping. That was what made the gifts impossible to take with me. They weren't proof that he had never cared. They were proof of how he had learned to care without ever having to be there. The cab stopped at a red light. My phone rang for the 5th time. I turned it off. Back in the penthouse, Adrien would still be standing among the things he had bought me, probably trying to understand why none of them had been enough to make me stay. For years, I had wondered what I needed to do to make my husband see me again. Lose my temper? Demand more? Become less understanding? Become someone harder to forget? In the end, I did none of those things. I simply stopped waiting. And somewhere high above the city, Adrien was finally looking directly at the life he had built for me and realizing that I was no longer inside it. The question was no longer whether he would notice I was gone. He had. The real question was what would happen when he understood why I had left everything behind. Adrian called again the next morning. By then, I had slept badly in a small furnished apartment across town, the kind rented by the month to people between leases or between versions of their lives. When my phone lit up with his name, I let it ring once before answering. Noah. He said my name like relief had been waiting behind his teeth. Where are you? I'm safe. A pause. That isn't what I asked. A week earlier, I might have apologized. I might have softened my voice, told him I knew he was worried, explained where I was before he could think I was making things difficult. Instead, I looked at the cardboard box holding most of what I had brought from the penthouse and said, "It's the answer I'm giving you." The silence on his end changed. Adrien was good at silence. In boardrooms, it made other people nervous enough to fill it. With me, it had usually made me rush to make things easier. This time I let it stay empty. "Come home," he said finally. "Not please. Not yet." Just the sentence of a man accustomed to solving problems by naming the expected outcome. "I'm not coming back today. Then tomorrow. Adrien, we can talk when you're here. We can talk without me being there." Another pause. Longer this time. "You left your things." "No, I left your things." His breath caught softly enough that I almost missed it. "The watch was yours. You bought it. Because you liked it. I liked having dinner with you more." That stopped him. I hadn't planned to say it. The words simply came out before I could make them gentler. I could picture the watch without trying. The silver one in the dark velvet case, delivered by courier while I sat alone at a restaurant on our first anniversary. Adrien had called 20 minutes after our reservation time. A deal had gone wrong. He would make it up to me. The watch arrived before dessert. I had worn it the next morning because I thought that was what a loving husband did when someone tried. "I was working," Adrien said now, but there was less certainty in his voice. "I know. You knew what my schedule was like when we got married. I know that too. Then why does this sound like punishment?" I closed my eyes. There it was. Not cruelty. Not even anger. Genuine confusion. "Because you still think I left so you would do something. Didn't you?" No, the answer came easily. That surprised me more than it seemed to surprise him. I stood and crossed to the single window. The view was ordinary. Brick walls, traffic, laundry moving on a balcony 2 buildings away. Nothing about it was impressive. Nothing about it belonged to Adrien. "I left because I was tired of waiting for you to notice something was wrong. You could have told me." I almost laughed again, but this time the feeling died before it reached my throat. "I tried." When? His question wasn't defensive. That made it worse. I thought of all the ways I had tried without ever saying the sentence plainly. The reservation confirmations I forwarded twice. The nights I asked whether he could be home early and then added, "Only if it isn't inconvenient." The Sunday I waited in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee until both were cold. The time I said I missed him and immediately followed it with, "But I know you're busy." Had those been requests? Or had I made them so easy to ignore that Adrien had honestly believed I was? "Fine. Not well enough," I said, but often enough that I stopped wanting to try. He went quiet. I could hear movement on his side, then the faint echo of the penthouse around him. "Tell me what you want me to do." Months ago, that question would have felt like victory. Now it only made me tired. "Nothing. That makes no sense." "I know. Noah, I can clear my schedule. We can go somewhere. You wanted that place in Maine, didn't you? I can have someone arrange." "Stop." He did. "Please don't send me somewhere. Don't buy anything. Don't arrange anything." My hand tightened around the phone. That's the problem. The line stayed silent. "You missed my birthday dinner," I said. "You sent the bracelet. I remember. You canceled the weekend in Napa. You sent the luggage. Noah, you missed our anniversary dinner. You sent the watch." I wasn't listing crimes. That wasn't what they were. Each one had seemed reasonable when it happened. Work ran late. Flights changed. Meetings expanded. Adrien apologized. Something beautiful arrived. I smiled. We moved on. The problem was that we had moved on so many times there was almost nowhere left to go. "I thought you liked those things," he said quietly. I did. That was the part one needed him to hear. That's why it took me so long to understand what was happening. You were generous every time you weren't there. I kept mistaking one for the other. Adrien didn't answer. For once, I didn't rush to rescue him from the silence. "I have to go," I said. "Where?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." "Then let it matter without you having access to it." The words landed between us harder than I expected. Adrien had never controlled where I went. He had never needed to. I had always told him. My schedule lived beside his on the shared calendar. My location was available. My evenings were flexible. I had built my life around the assumption that if Adrien ever found time for me, I should be easy to reach. That assumption was over. "Are you saying I can't call you?" he asked. "I'm saying being my husband doesn't mean I have to answer whenever you decide you're ready to talk." He inhaled slowly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. Neither do I." And for the first time since I had left, I felt something that wasn't grief. Relief. I ended the call before I could turn my boundary into an apology. My hands shook afterward, but I didn't call him back. Across the city, Adrien still had the penthouse, the car, the watch, the bracelet, the black card, and every resource that had once made our life look untouchable. What he no longer had was the one thing both of us had treated as automatic: access to me. And as I set my phone down, I understood something Adrien had not yet understood. I hadn't left to make him come looking for me. I had left because, somewhere along the way, I had stopped believing he ever would. For 2 days after that call, Adrien didn't contact me. I noticed. I hated that I noticed. Every time my phone lit up, some part of me expected his name, and every time it wasn't him, I felt both relieved and disappointed. That was the problem with finally leaving someone you had spent years making excuses for. Distance could change where you slept. It couldn't instantly change what your body had learned to wait for. On the third morning, Adrien sent one message. No demand. No question about my location. Just, "I understand why you don't want the gifts." I stared at it longer than I should have. Then another message appeared. "I don't understand why I didn't see it before." That one stayed with me. Not because it was an apology. It wasn't. Because for the first time, Adrien seemed to be looking at the same objects I had been looking at for years and seeing something different. I didn't reply. Later, I learned what had happened inside the penthouse after our call. Adrien had started with the watch. He had taken it from the marble table and opened the box, probably expecting memory to work in his favor. It was our first anniversary gift. Beautiful. Expensive. Exactly the kind of thing people photograph beside champagne and call romance. But Adrien remembered something else this time. He remembered buying it from his office after missing our dinner. Not choosing it weeks in advance. Not giving it to me across a table. Buying it because he wasn't going to make it to the restaurant and needed something to arrive where he could not. Then he picked up the bracelet. My birthday. Same pattern. He had missed dinner, called late, apologized, and asked someone to send me something special. Then the weekender. The trip to Napa. He had canceled less than a day before we were supposed to leave. I had told him it was fine. The bag arrived the next morning. At the time, Adrien had apparently thought that meant he had fixed something. 3 objects. 3 occasions. 3 times he had been absent and responded by purchasing proof that I still mattered. That was the discovery he couldn't unsee. The gifts weren't random. They formed a record. I hadn't arranged them that way to teach him a lesson. I had barely understood it myself until I started packing. I remembered standing in our bedroom with the watch in one hand and the old gray sneakers on the floor beside my suitcase. One cost more than my first car. The other had a split forming near the left sole. I took the sneakers. I left the watch. That was when the difference became obvious to me. The things I had chosen for myself belonged to my life. So many of the things Adrien had given me belonged to his absences. That afternoon, I finally answered his message. I wrote, "Seeing it isn't the same as understanding it." His reply came 10 minutes later. "I know." That was all. No promise to fix everything. No invitation to dinner. No offer of a trip. The restraint unsettled me more than another grand gesture would have. I put my phone down and tried to work, but an hour later it buzzed again. This time he sent a photograph. For a second, I almost didn't open it. Then I did. The gifts were still on the marble table exactly where I had left them. Beneath the photograph, he had written, "The anniversary watch. Your birthday bracelet. The bag from Napa." I thought I was making up for not being there. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. He wasn't asking me to forgive him. He was identifying the pattern. That mattered, even though I didn't want it to. I typed yes. 3 dots appeared immediately, then vanished. They came back. Vanished again. Finally, "Did you know that then?" I leaned back in my chair. It was a harder question than I expected. "No," I said aloud to the empty room. Then I typed it. "Not really." I thought being disappointed made me ungrateful. His response took longer this time. "Because of me?" My fingers hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted the clean answer. "Yes, you did this. You made me small. You taught me not to ask." But that wasn't entirely true, and leaving Adrien had made me strangely unwilling to keep lying just because a lie was emotionally convenient. I wrote, "You made it easy for me to believe." That answer hurt more because it belonged to both of us without dividing the blame equally. Adrien had failed to show up. I had become increasingly skilled at pretending I didn't need him to. Every time I said, "It's fine," he believed me. Every time he sent something beautiful, I accepted it as proof that asking for more would be unreasonable. We had built a marriage around a misunderstanding neither of us had been forced to examine because money made disappointment comfortable. Adrien replied almost 20 minutes later. "I'm sorry." I looked at those 2 words and felt no rush of forgiveness. But I didn't feel nothing either. The gifts had changed. 3 days earlier, they had been the things I needed to leave behind so I could walk out. Now they were something else too. Evidence. Not evidence that Adrien had never loved me. That would have been simpler. They were evidence that he had repeatedly recognized my disappointment and answered it with the one language he understood best, providing. He had noticed enough to compensate, but not enough to stay. And suddenly the question I had carried out of the penthouse no longer felt complete. I had wanted to know when Adrien would finally understand why I left. Now I was beginning to wonder something harder. He knew my favorite tea, my jacket size, the watch I once stopped to admire in a window. He had known enough about me to choose every gift perfectly. So how had the man who knew exactly what to buy me become the man who had no idea what I needed? Adrien asked to see me the next evening. Not at the penthouse. Not at his office. He wrote, "You choose the place." I almost said no. The strange thing was that refusing would have been easier than agreeing. Distance had given me something clean, rules I could understand. He called. I decided whether to answer. He asked where I was. I didn't tell him. He offered solutions. I rejected them. But the photograph of those gifts was still sitting in our message thread, and beneath it was the question I couldn't shake. How had someone who paid such close attention to what I liked missed what I needed? So I chose a quiet coffee shop halfway between my apartment and downtown, somewhere neither of us had history. Adrien arrived before me. That alone felt wrong. For most of our marriage, I had been the one waiting. He stood when I came in, then stopped himself before walking toward me. That small hesitation mattered more than I wanted it to. "Thank you for coming," he said. No kiss. No hand at my back. No assumption that being married gave him the right to close the distance. I sat across from him. He had already ordered coffee, but only for himself. Another detail I noticed. He hadn't guessed what I wanted. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About the gifts." I figured. You were right. I waited. I kept treating disappointment like a problem I could solve. His jaw tightened slightly. If I missed something, I replaced the experience with something else. Something expensive enough that I could tell myself I had still done something for you. It was more honest than I expected. "And now?" I asked. Now I know that wasn't enough. For one dangerous second, hope moved through me. Not forgiveness. Just the old reflex of wanting one sentence to fix everything. Then Adrien continued. "So tell me how to make it right." The hope disappeared almost as quickly as it came. I looked at him. "You still think there's an answer I can give you? There has to be something." "Why?" He frowned. "Because if I know what I did wrong, I can change it. That's not the same as understanding it." His expression tightened. "You said that already." "Because you're doing the same thing again." "I'm sitting here." "Physically, yes." His eyes sharpened, but he didn't interrupt. "Adrien, you're still treating me like a problem with missing instructions. Tell me the correct action. Tell me the right amount of time. Tell me what apology works. Then you can do it and get the outcome you want. Which is my husband back." "Exactly." He leaned away slightly. The coffee shop was quiet around us. Low music, cups touching saucers, someone laughing softly near the window. Nothing dramatic happened. No one raised their voice. And yet something between us narrowed. Adrien finally understood enough to know I was hurt, but not enough to see that his desire to repair the damage was still centered on restoring the life he had lost. "Is it wrong that I want you back?" he asked. "No," I answered immediately. "But wanting me back and understanding why I left aren't the same thing." "Then help me understand." I looked down at my hands. Months ago, I would have been grateful just to hear that sentence. Now it frightened me because I knew I could give him a list. More dinners. Fewer canceled plans. Calls when he was late. Weekends protected from work. If I handed him those things, Adrien would probably do every one of them. He was disciplined enough to rebuild his entire schedule if he believed that was the solution. and I still wasn't sure that would change the thing underneath it. Do you remember the night I asked you to come home early because I couldn't sleep? I asked. Adrian's forehead creased. You were having trouble for a while. That night. He thought. I sent you the tea. I nodded. The one you like. The chamomile blend from that place in Vermont. You remember exactly what tea it was. Of course. Do you remember why I wanted you home? Silence. He searched my face as if the answer might be there. You said you couldn't sleep. I said I'd been having a bad week. I said the apartment felt too quiet when you were gone. His mouth opened, then closed. You sent 6 tins of tea. Adrien looked down at his coffee. I thought it would help. I know. And there it was again. The sentence that had followed me through our entire marriage. I know. Not sarcasm. Not accusation. The terrible part was that I did know. Adrien had not heard, I need you. He had heard, I have a problem. And he had solved the problem he believed I had given him. You keep asking what you missed, I said. Maybe that's the wrong question. He lifted his eyes. Then what's the right one? Why was sending the tea the obvious answer to you? Something changed in his face. Not understanding. Not yet. More like resistance meeting a question it couldn't immediately dismiss. Because you needed something that would help you sleep. And coming home? I had a meeting. I know you had a meeting. My voice stayed calm. I'm not asking why you didn't come home that night. I'm asking why, when someone you loved told you he needed you, your first instinct was to send something. Adrien went very still. For the first time since I left, he didn't have an answer ready. The silence between us felt different from the silences on the phone. It wasn't a contest. It wasn't a punishment. It was pressure. I watched him sit with it. I loved you, he said finally. I know. His eyes flickered. You keep saying that. Because that's what makes this harder. I swallowed. If I believed you never loved me, this would be simple. He stared at me. Then what do you believe? I had no clean answer. Not anymore. I believe you loved me, I said. I just don't know what you thought loving me required. Adrien looked down at his hands. The same hands that had signed checks, booked flights, approved purchases, opened doors I had never asked to walk through. For the first time, I saw something in him that looked less like regret and more like uncertainty about himself. I stood. He looked up immediately. Noah, I'm not leaving because this conversation went badly. I put on my coat. I'm leaving because I think that question is yours. He didn't try to stop me. That mattered too. Outside, the evening air was cold enough to sting my face. I walked half a block before checking my phone. No message. No call. And strangely, that unsettled me less than the thought I carried away from the table. Adrien had finally begun to understand what he had done. But neither of us yet understood why loving me had always meant providing something instead of simply being there. Adrien didn't call that night. He didn't call the next morning either. By afternoon, I began to wonder whether my question had done what every boundary eventually seemed to do between us. Created another silence neither of us knew how to cross. Then, just after 6, a message appeared. You were right. I read it once. Then again, a second message followed. I kept asking what I should have done differently. That wasn't the question. I waited. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then returned. I need to understand why what I did felt right to me. Something tightened in my chest. That was different. Not because Adrien had suddenly solved anything. He hadn't. But for the first time since I left, he wasn't asking me to hand him instructions for getting me back. 20 minutes later, he called. I answered. I've been thinking about the tea, he said. No hello. No attempt to soften the conversation. And the watch. And Napa. Your birthday. I leaned against the kitchen counter in my apartment. Okay. Every time you told me something was wrong, I heard a problem. His voice was quieter than usual. You couldn't sleep, so I found the best tea I could. I missed dinner, so I sent something that proved I hadn't forgotten the date. I canceled a trip, so I bought you something for the next one. I said nothing. I thought solving the problem was how I showed you I cared. There it was. Simple enough that it almost felt disappointing. No hidden betrayal. No secret reason. Just a pattern that had been sitting in front of us for years. And when the problem was that I missed you? I asked. Adrien was silent for a moment. I don't think I understood that as a problem I could solve. So you sent something. Yes. He didn't defend it. That mattered. Did you think I wanted all of that? I thought you deserved it. That wasn't what I asked. I know. His answer came faster this time. No. I didn't think you were asking for a watch or a trip or 6 tins of tea. I thought, if I couldn't give you my time, I should at least give you something valuable. I closed my eyes. For months, maybe years, I had translated his absences into one conclusion. I was not important enough. The gifts had seemed to confirm it. He could authorize a purchase in 30 seconds, but he couldn't give me an evening. I had believed the equation was obvious. Time was valuable. Therefore, if he wouldn't give me his time, I wasn't valuable enough. But Adrien had been working from a different equation entirely. You thought providing for me was the same as being there for me, I said. I think I thought it was better than failing you completely. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, not dramatically, just enough for me to hear what he was finally admitting. If I couldn't be there, I could still make sure you had everything. Everything except you. Yes. The word hurt more than an excuse would have. I sat down at the tiny kitchen table. It would have been easier if Adrien had never cared. Easier if the money had been dismissal, if the gifts had been guilt, if every missed dinner had simply meant work mattered, and I didn't. I had built my anger around that version because anger gave me somewhere firm to stand. But now the ground beneath it had shifted. Adrien had loved me. I believed that. The problem was that he had learned to express love in a way that could keep me safe, comfortable, surrounded, and still completely alone. Noah, he said, this doesn't excuse what I did. I looked toward the dark window above the sink. No, it doesn't. I'm not asking it to. Another pause. I think I've spent most of my life believing that if someone depended on me, the worst thing I could do was fail to provide what they needed. I listened carefully. He wasn't giving me a childhood story or blaming anyone else. He was describing the rule he had been living by. So when you needed something, I tried to make sure you had it. When you were disappointed, I tried to replace what I'd missed with something I could deliver. I kept telling myself I was taking care of you. And you were, I said. That's the awful part. He went quiet. You took care of everything around me. My throat tightened. I just stopped feeling like you were taking care of us. For several seconds, all I could hear was his breathing. Then Adrien said, I don't know how to fix that yet. Something inside me eased, not because I wanted him helpless, but because it was the first answer he had given me that didn't sound like a man reaching for the fastest solution. Good, I said softly. He almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. Good. If you had an answer after 3 days, I wouldn't trust it. Fair. I traced a scratch in the tabletop with my thumb. What are you going to do? The question came out before I could decide whether I wanted to ask it. Adrien took his time. First, I'm going to stop making getting you back the test of whether I'm doing this right. I sat very still. What does that mean? It means I want you home. His voice was steady. But if every change I make is designed to make you come home, then I'm still treating you like the outcome I'm trying to purchase. I didn't answer. You told me being your husband doesn't mean I get automatic access to you, he continued. I hated hearing that. I know, but you were right. The words landed quietly. No grand apology. No promise that everything would be different by morning. Just Adrien giving up something he had always assumed was his. The right to expect the marriage to remain available while he figured himself out. So I'm not going to ask you to come back, he said. Not now. My chest tightened for a completely different reason. I had wanted him to understand. I hadn't expected understanding to make leaving harder. And if I never do? I asked. The silence that followed was long enough that I knew he was choosing the answer instead of reaching for one. Then I still need to learn this, he said. Because apparently I can love someone and still make them feel alone. I don't want to be that man, even if changing doesn't bring you back. After we hung up, I sat at the table with my phone in my hand and felt something I had not prepared for. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Something more dangerous than either of those. Empathy. I had spent the first days after leaving asking when Adrien would finally understand how badly he had failed me. Now I had part of the answer. He had loved me. He had simply mistaken provision for presence until there was almost nothing left of our marriage except the things he had provided. That should have made the decision easier. Instead, it replaced the question completely. If Adrien had truly loved me all along, and if he finally understood that the way he loved had been hurting me, then what mattered next was no longer whether he regretted losing me. It was whether a man who had spent years loving through money, solutions, and distance could learn to love differently when there was no guarantee I would ever come back. For the first time since I left, Adrien stopped trying to bring me home. That should have made everything easier. Instead, it made me watch him more closely. 3 days passed without flowers arriving at my apartment, without a car appearing downstairs, without a reservation being made in my name. There were no packages, no links to places we could escape to, no solutions disguised as apologies. Adrien sent one message each evening. Nothing dramatic. Monday, I hope today was easier than yesterday. Tuesday, no need to answer. I just wanted you to know I was thinking about you. Wednesday, after rain had hammered against my windows most of the afternoon. Drive carefully if you're out tonight. I answered that one with, I'm home. His reply came a minute later. Good. That was it. No attempt to turn 3 letters into permission for a longer conversation. I hated how much that mattered. Before our separation, Adrien had always been excellent at action. If I mentioned needing something, he moved immediately. Problems disappeared around him because he had money, staff, influence, and the habit of treating delay like incompetence. But now the problem was us, and for once he couldn't solve it by moving faster. So he was doing something I had almost never seen him do. He was waiting. A week after our midpoint conversation, I had to go back to the penthouse. Not to return. I had left a folder of personal documents in the desk beside the bedroom. Things I hadn't remembered during the strange calm of packing one suitcase and walking away. I texted Adrien before I went. I need to pick up some papers tomorrow afternoon. He responded, of course. Then, after a pause, would you prefer I not be there? I stared at the question. Old. Adrien would have told me when he was available. New Adrien was asking what would make the situation easier for me. I typed, you can be there. I'm only staying a few minutes. Understood. When the elevator doors opened the next day, the penthouse looked almost exactly as it had when I left. That surprised me. I had expected some sign of Adrien reclaiming the space. Instead, the silence remained. The return gifts were no longer spread across the marble table, but they hadn't disappeared back into drawers or closets either. They sat together in plain boxes near the wall, closed but not hidden. Adrien was in the kitchen. He looked tired, not destroyed, not theatrically miserable, just tired in the ordinary way people look when sleep has stopped being reliable. Hi, he said. Hi. He didn't move toward me. Your documents are still in the bedroom desk. I didn't touch them. Thanks. I started toward the hallway, then stopped when I noticed a paper bag on the kitchen counter. For half a second, my entire body tightened. What's that? Adrien followed my gaze. Dinner. For me. For me. Something in his expression shifted. I ordered one portion. I almost smiled. It was such a ridiculous thing to notice, but months earlier he would have ordered enough for both of us just in case, turning even my brief visit into an assumption that I might stay. Okay. I found the folder exactly where I remembered it. When I returned, Adrien was still in the kitchen. He hadn't followed me. He hadn't used my being there as an excuse to start another conversation. I should have left. Instead, I heard myself ask, how are you? He looked genuinely surprised. You don't have to ask me that. I know. That was why I had asked. He leaned against the counter. I'm learning how often I used to turn every conversation into a negotiation. I said nothing. You'd give me 5 minutes, and I'd try to turn it into dinner. You'd answer one message, and I'd ask when I could see you. I kept treating every opening like something I had to maximize. That sounds like you. His mouth moved slightly. It does. Then he looked at me and said, so I'm not going to do that now. There it was. The test neither of us had announced. I was standing in the home I had left, close enough for Adrien to ask me to stay, and he wasn't asking. Part of me had expected his new understanding to collapse the moment he had an opportunity to get what he wanted. Instead, he stepped away from the counter and gave me a clear path to the elevator. You came for the folder, he said. You have it. I tightened my grip on the papers. That's all. His eyes held mine. That's all you asked for. The answer hit somewhere deeper than I expected. Not because it was romantic. It wasn't. It was almost painfully ordinary. But for years, Adrien had heard my words and immediately translated them into what he believed would be better for me. Tea instead of company. Gifts instead of dinners. Solutions instead of presents. Now I had asked for one thing, and he was letting one thing be enough. I walked toward the elevator, then stopped before pressing the button. Adrien. Yeah. Thank you. He didn't ask what for. Maybe he understood. Maybe he was finally learning not to force every feeling into an explanation before it was ready. You're welcome, he said. The doors opened. I stepped inside. Adrien stayed where he was. No hand stopping the doors. No last-second request. No promise. As the elevator descended, I realized my heart was beating harder than it had when I arrived. I had spent the first half of our separation trying to prove to myself that leaving had been necessary. Then Adrien had understood why. Now he was beginning to behave like that understanding actually cost him something. He was giving up opportunities to pull me closer because respecting the distance mattered more than using it. And that frightened me in a way his regret never had. Regret was easy to distrust. Change was harder. By the time I reached the lobby, the question was no longer whether Adrien could say the right things. For the first time, I had seen him choose differently when the old choice was right in front of him. I still wasn't ready to go home. I still didn't know whether I ever would be. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I had to admit something I had not expected to admit this soon. My trust in him was no longer zero. And if his change was real, then eventually I was going to have to decide whether distance was still protecting me, or whether I had begun hiding inside it. For the next week, Adrien kept giving me reasons to trust him, and I kept pretending that trust didn't require anything from me. That was the part one hadn't expected. When I left the penthouse, distance had been a decision. Now it was becoming a question. Adrien didn't pressure me. He didn't ask when I was coming home. When we spoke, he listened without turning every conversation into a plan. Twice, I ended the call first, and twice, he simply said goodnight. The third time, I stayed on the line after we had run out of things to say. Neither of us mentioned it. That quiet minute scared me more than any argument we had ever had, because it felt familiar without feeling the same. I had spent years believing that if Adrien ever changed, I would know exactly what I wanted. I would either forgive him or I wouldn't. I would go home or move on. Instead, his change removed the certainty that had protected me. One evening, he texted, "Would you have dinner with me Thursday? You can choose where. No pressure if the answer is no." I read the message 3 times. Then I typed yes. I chose the same coffee shop where I had asked him why sending tea had seemed more natural than coming home. It wasn't romantic. That was why I wanted it. Adrien was already there when I arrived. He stood, waited for me to sit, and sat across from me. "You keep getting here first," I said. "I'm working on my reputation." I smiled before I could stop myself. Adrien noticed, but he didn't make anything of it. We ordered food. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. My work. A book I had finally finished. A restaurant near my apartment that made terrible coffee but excellent breakfast sandwiches. Adrien asked questions and, more importantly, stayed with the answers. He didn't glance at his phone. He didn't redirect the conversation toward us. It would have been easy to call that progress and leave it there. But progress had created its own problem. I was beginning to enjoy being with my husband again. Halfway through dinner, Adrien set down his fork. "Can I ask you something?" My body tightened automatically. "You can ask. Are you still planning to leave permanently?" There it was. Not a demand. Not a trap. Just the question we had been carefully walking around. I looked toward the window. "I don't know." "Okay." I turned back. "That's all." What else should I say? "I don't know." "Convince me, maybe." The words came out sharper than I intended. Adrien's expression changed. "Do you want me to?" I opened my mouth and stopped. That was the question underneath everything, and I didn't know how to answer it without giving something away. "I wanted you to fight for us for a long time," I said. "And now I don't know whether fighting for us means asking me to come back or letting me decide, without making your pain my responsibility." Adrien looked down for a moment. "Probably the second one." "That's a very reasonable answer. You sound annoyed by it." "I am." He almost smiled, but didn't. "Why?" I could have avoided the question. A month earlier, I would have. I would have said I was tired or changed the subject or told him it didn't matter. Instead, I forced myself to stay there. "Because you're making this harder." Adrien went still. "How?" "When you kept missing things, I knew what to do. I waited. When waiting became unbearable, I left. When you kept trying to solve everything, I knew what to do then too. I said no." I looked at him. "But now you're listening. You're respecting the distance. You're actually changing, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. You don't owe me anything because I'm changing." "I know." "Then why does it feel like you do?" That question found the part of me I had been avoiding. "Because if you're really different and I still leave, then I can't tell myself I had no choice." Adrien didn't answer. I could hear dishes moving behind the counter, the hiss of the espresso machine, traffic outside. Ordinary sounds around a sentence that changed something important. I had been treating distance as neutral, as though staying away required no choice at all. But it did. If I kept Adrien outside forever because I was. Afraid he might hurt me the same way again. That was still a decision. Maybe the right one. Maybe not. But mine. There's something else, I said. What? I spent years making myself easy for you. My voice dropped. I thought needing less made me easier to love. And when that failed, I left instead of asking for anything anymore. Adrian's face tightened. Noah, I'm not blaming myself for what you did. Good. But I am responsible for what I do next. I took a breath. I don't want to go back to being the person who says everything is fine until the only honest thing left is walking out the door. Adrien looked at me for a long moment. What do you need from me now? It was the same kind of question he had asked before, but it didn't sound the same anymore. He wasn't asking for instructions to repair me. He was giving me room to answer. And this time, instead of saying nothing, I tried. I need time that isn't what's left after everything else. Adrien nodded once. Okay. I need to be able to tell you I'm disappointed without immediately making you feel better about it. Another nod. Okay. And I need to know that if work wins sometimes, you'll call it a choice. Not an emergency. Not something that just happened. That one took him longer. That's fair. My throat tightened. Saying those things felt strangely more vulnerable than leaving him had. Leaving required one suitcase. Staying in the conversation required admitting I still wanted something. Adrien leaned forward slightly, then stopped before reaching across the table. Can I tell you what I need? I nodded. I need you not to come back because you feel sorry for me. His voice was steady. And I need you not to stay away just because leaving was the first thing that finally made me understand. I looked at him. Neither request asked me to choose him. That was exactly why I could no longer avoid choosing. When dinner ended, Adrien walked with me to the sidewalk. He didn't ask to come home with me. I didn't invite him. But before we separated, I said, we need to decide what happens to us. Adrien's eyes held mine. I know. Not tonight. Whenever you're ready. I shook my head. No. That's what I'm saying. I've been using not yet because it lets me keep every option open. I took a breath. I don't want to do that anymore. For the first time that evening, Adrien looked afraid. Not because I was leaving, because I was finally going to choose. Tomorrow, he asked. I nodded. Tomorrow. I walked away before fear could turn that decision back into another delay. The old marriage was already gone. I knew that now. I could not return to being grateful for gifts instead of presents. And Adrien could not unknow what his version of love had cost us. By tomorrow, distance would stop being a place where I could hide from the answer. I would have to tell my husband whether there was anything left for us to build. The next evening, I met Adrien knowing I could no longer hide behind the word later. I chose the coffee shop again, not because it was romantic, but because nothing there belonged to either of us. No penthouse, no car waiting outside, no table reserved under Adrian Cole's name. Just 2 chairs, 2 cups of coffee, and a decision neither of us could buy our way around. Adrien was already seated when I arrived. He stood, then waited. I took the chair across from him. I've made a decision, I said before fear could turn the sentence into something softer. His hands tightened once around his cup. Okay. He didn't ask if it was good news. That mattered. I'm not coming back. Adrien's face changed, but he stayed still. I made myself continue. Not to the penthouse. Not to the marriage we had. His eyes dropped for a second. When he looked back at me, there was pain there, but no argument. I understand. I don't think you do yet. I took a breath. This was the part leaving had allowed me to avoid. Walking out had been easier than saying exactly what I needed and risking the answer. I still love you. Adrien closed his eyes briefly. I saw hope move through his face, and I hated how much courage it took not to protect him from what came next. But loving you isn't enough for me to go back. He nodded slowly. I know. I need time that belongs to us before everything else takes what's left. I need to be allowed to be disappointed, without you solving it. If I tell you I need you to hear me before you decide what the answer should be. Adrien listened without interrupting. And if work matters more sometimes, say that. Choose it honestly. Don't make me spend another 5 years wondering whether I was unreasonable for wanting my husband. My voice shook on the last word. I let it. I was done making my needs sound smaller, so they would be easier to accept. Those are not demands I'm apologizing for anymore. You shouldn't. I used to think I had to be easy to love. Adrien's expression tightened. Noah, let me finish. He stopped. That alone felt different. I thought if I asked for less, understood more, waited quietly, never complained about the meetings or missed dinners, then eventually you'd notice how good I was at loving you. I looked down at my hands. Instead, I became so easy to live around that I almost disappeared. Adrien said nothing. And when I finally couldn't do it anymore, I disappeared for real. The words sat between us. I had spent weeks blaming Adrien's way of loving me. Now I was facing mine too. Silence had protected me from rejection until it became its own kind of damage. Leaving had saved something in me. But I didn't want leaving to become the only way I knew how to be heard. So if there is anything after this, I said, I'm not coming back as the version of me who accepts whatever is offered and calls it enough. Adrien looked at me for a long moment. What are you saying? There it was. The decision. No twist. No sudden proof. No reason to choose except everything we had already done to get here. I'm saying the old marriage is over. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. And I'm saying, I stopped. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I'm willing to find out whether we can build a different one. Adrien didn't move. For once, he didn't reach for me. You mean that? Yes. His breath left slowly. What does that look like? I don't completely know. Okay. But it doesn't start with me moving back into your penthouse. Okay. And it doesn't start with promises you can make tonight. Another nod. Okay. I almost smiled. You really learned that word. Apparently I needed practice. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The tension didn't disappear. It changed. That was different. Adrien leaned forward slightly. Can I tell you what I want? I nodded. I want another chance with you. Not another chance at the same marriage. He paused. But I don't want you to agree because I'm hurting. And I don't want you to think my changing means you owe me anything. The man I had left would have told me how he planned to fix everything. This Adrien was admitting he couldn't guarantee the outcome. Then there's something else you need to know, I said. What? If we try again and I start making myself small, I need to say it before I disappear. His expression softened. And if I start solving instead of listening, you tell me. I will. Even if I don't like hearing it. Especially then. That time, Adrien smiled. Not the polished smile he gave people when he wanted a conversation to end. Something quieter. Tired. Hopeful. Human. He placed his hand on the table between us, palm down. He didn't reach across. He simply left it there. A choice, not a claim. I looked at it for several seconds before putting my hand beside his. Not under it. Not inside it. Beside it. Adrien glanced down and then back at me. Neither of us moved closer. We didn't need to. The decision had already changed everything. I was not returning home. There was no old home left to return to. The penthouse still belonged to Adrien. The gifts were still his. The marriage we had built around assumption, silence, and substitution was finished. If we went forward, it would be because both of us kept choosing to. I'm scared, I admitted. Adrien's fingers shifted, almost touching mine. So am I. That doesn't make me feel better. It wasn't supposed to. I laughed softly. Good answer. We stayed there for another minute before standing. Outside, Adrien didn't ask where I was going. He didn't offer a car. He didn't ask when he could see me again. I was the one who stopped on the sidewalk. Are you free Saturday? Surprise crossed his face. Yes. Don't clear anything. I won't. If you're already free, we can have dinner. His answer came quietly. I'd like that. Then we walked in opposite directions. Not because we were finished, but because for the first time, separation did not mean abandonment and closeness did not mean surrender. Adrien had lost the right to assume I would always be there. I had lost the habit of pretending I needed nothing. And somewhere between those two losses, we had made our first honest choice as partners. I still didn't know exactly what our future would look like, but I knew what it would not look like. I would never again live in a beautiful home where I had to disappear to be noticed. And Adrien would never again get to call providing everything the same thing as being there. Saturday was the first time Adrien and I had dinner after deciding not to save our old marriage. I expected that distinction to feel fragile, like something we would have to keep explaining to each other until it became real. Instead, the first proof came before we even sat down. At 4 that afternoon, Adrien called. I need to tell you something before tonight. My stomach tightened out of habit. Okay. Something came up at work. The old sentence. For years, those 5 words had been enough to erase whatever came after them. I waited. I can move it, he continued. But I want to be honest. Moving it will cause problems Monday. Nothing catastrophic. Just problems. I leaned against my kitchen counter. What are you asking me? I'm not asking you to decide for me. He paused. I'm telling you the choice. I said I was free tonight. I am keeping dinner. For a second, I didn't know what to say. The old Adrian would have called the meeting unavoidable, sent his apologies, and had something expensive delivered before I could admit I was disappointed. This Adrian was not pretending work had become unimportant. He was simply acknowledging that I was important too. Are you sure? I asked. Yes. Even with the problems Monday? Especially because there will be problems Monday. Otherwise, this isn't a choice. That sentence stayed with me long after we hung up. At 7, I arrived at the small restaurant near my apartment, the one I had once. Told him served terrible coffee and excellent breakfast sandwiches. Adrian was already there. No private room. No bottle waiting at the table. No flowers. He had simply shown up. I thought this place was breakfast, he said when I sat down. They serve dinner too. Is the coffee still terrible? Absolutely. Good. Some things should stay reliable. I laughed. It was easy. That frightened me less now. We ordered, and for most of the meal, we didn't discuss our marriage. We talked about my book, about a ridiculous presentation Adrien had sat through that morning, about whether the restaurant's fries were actually good or whether I had oversold them. Halfway through, Adrien's phone vibrated against the table. His eyes flicked toward the screen. Then to me. You can check it, I said. I know. He turned the phone face down. I'm choosing not to. No dramatic gesture. No speech about priorities. Just a phone turned over and a conversation continued. That was when I understood why the ending I had imagined after leaving him had been wrong. I had thought I needed Adrien to finally see how much I was worth. I had pictured some enormous realization, something that would balance the years I had spent feeling invisible. But value wasn't something he could hand back to me once he recognized it. I had already taken that with me when I left the penthouse. What I needed from him now was simpler and harder consistency, a pattern different from the one that had driven me away. After dinner, we walked to my apartment. Adrien stopped at the front entrance. Thank you for tonight. You don't have to thank me every time I see you. I know. He smiled slightly. I still wanted to. I reached for the door, then hesitated. Months ago, I would have invited him upstairs because I was afraid not inviting him might look cold. Weeks ago, I would have kept him outside because distance felt safer. Now I asked myself what I actually wanted. Do you want coffee? I said. His eyebrows lifted. The good kind. Obviously. Then yes. Upstairs, Adrien sat at my small kitchen table while I made 2 cups. He didn't comment on how little the apartment was compared with the penthouse. He didn't offer to replace the scratch table or the cheap coffee maker. His eyes landed on my chipped ceramic mug. You took that with you. I looked down at it. I did. I always hated that mug. You wanted to replace it. Several times. I remember. Adrien picked up his cup. I think I'm beginning to understand why you kept it. Because it still works? Because you chose it. I looked at him. That too. We drank in silence for a moment. Then I said, I'm still not moving back. I know. I don't know if I ever want to live there again. A tiny pause. Then we won't make the penthouse the price of being together. There was no disappointment hidden inside the answer. Or maybe there was, and he simply understood that disappointment was his to carry without turning it into pressure on me. That mattered even more. And the gifts? I asked. Adrien looked almost embarrassed. Still boxed up. What are you going to do with them? I haven't decided. I thought about the watch, the bracelet, the weekender. Once, they had looked like proof that I had everything. Then they became proof of what was missing. Now, sitting at a scratched kitchen table with Adrien across from me, they felt strangely distant. You can keep them, I said. They were never the real problem. I know that now. He reached toward the middle of the table, then stopped. Can I? I looked at his hand. Weeks earlier, he had left it between us without asking for mine. Tonight, he asked. Yes. His fingers closed gently around mine. Nothing in the room changed. The apartment was still small. The table was still scratched. My mug was still chipped. Adrien's phone would still be full of problems tomorrow, and I was still capable of getting scared and making myself quiet. He was still capable of slipping into solutions before listening. We had not become different people overnight. We had become people who finally knew what the old pattern cost. If you start disappearing again, Adrien said, tell me before you leave. I squeezed his hand. If you stop listening again, don't make me ask twice. Deal. I smiled. That sounded dangerously like a contract. Sorry. I'm kidding. He laughed, and this time the silence after it felt warm instead of empty. Later, when Adrien left, he didn't send a car back with something he thought I might like. No flowers appeared the next morning. No jewelry. No weekend escape. At 10, my phone buzzed once. Thank you for last night. I'm here if you want me. I looked around the apartment I had chosen for myself, then at the chipped mug beside me. For years, Adrien had filled every absence with something beautiful. In the end, the most important thing he learned to give me was the one thing that could never fit inside a box: himself. And the most important thing I learned was that I could ask for him without apologizing for needing him. I had returned the watch, the bracelet, the luggage, the card, and the key to a penthouse where I had slowly disappeared. I never asked for any of them back. I didn't need to. For the first time in our marriage, there was nothing left between us that I needed to return.